Deb, do you have to say to people?
Sorry, Paul, what was that?
Do you say what is related things, and just to describe how the whole subject of dealing with engineering and a climate emergency is. And what I'd like to do is to, towards the end, talk about, so what, we've done all this lot, how are we going to be able to explain the sort of concepts I'm talking about here to people as part of the project? That is young people at some woodcraft folk events, or younger people who are in the kids field at a festival, and how we're going about to develop the materials that we need to do for the project as a whole. So in previous weeks, people have just said a few things about themselves to give their background, so I'll do the same thing. So my background as an engineer is training in applied energy. So I'm an energy manager by profession and a chartered engineer, and I spent most of my career in local government or at universities trying to address things at a city scale. And by things, I mean how you reduce energy in buildings, how you reduce energy demand in communities, how you reduce energy demand in cities, etc. So it's very much a demand side focus rather than a supply side focus. Traditionally, UK energy policy focused on the supply side. So if there was an energy issue, if there was electricity, a heat, a transport issue, then the government solution was to provide more somehow. So build some more power stations, get some more gas or oil, and get some more aviation fuel, etc. And my work has always focused on, well, how do we use this fuel, this energy, more efficiently? And then more recently, how do you get rid of all the fossil fuels altogether? And I helped develop the strategy for Leicester City, the Leicester Energy Strategy back in the early 90s, and worked on developing strategies for other cities in Europe and in other countries as well, and was a European expert on how you reduce energy in cities. And how you do that is relatively straightforward, really. You use energy more efficiently, you insulate things, you only buy efficient appliances, you only buy efficient kit, and you make sure that whatever energy you are using is coming, as much of it as possible, coming from renewable sources. And you basically avoid waste. Now, I started looking at this from a very technical viewpoint, but soon realized that technology was not the issue. The technology exists mostly, it's out there. We know how to design and build low energy buildings. We know how industry could be more efficient, but we simply don't do it. So I then moved on to addressing non-technical barriers and dealing with non-engineers, working with social scientists and economists, and also trying to engage more with decision makers, particularly with leaders of councils and mayors of cities who have got a key role in future development of their areas. Again, what tended to happen in the UK was that lots of people involved in national energy policy, but the local to regional level often got forgotten about. So that's where I spent most of my effort. So what have we got? So working for Leicester City Council, we managed to insulate lots of council houses. So one year we did 6,000 council houses, cavity wall insulation, top-up loft insulation. Since I left the council, they installed solar PV on loads of homes, over 1,000 homes. They did external wall insulation on lots of homes. They put in this district heating scheme, which you can see a photograph there on the left. So there's something like 14 kilometres of hot water distribution pipes under the centre of Leicester, which is fired by a centralised boiler. They did external wall insulation of homes that you couldn't fill the cavity with. I was also involved in lots of data analysis, looking at time series data throughout the year, how electricity, gas and water consumption varies half hourly throughout the day, and comparing it with other days and things, and also worked with SMEs throughout Europe to try and improve their energy efficiency. And a lot of the stuff we were finding was that people simply left the equipment on when it didn't need to be left on. They knew they left the heating on at weekend, but they didn't realise how much it was costing them, or nobody explained to them what the CO2 implications were. So a lot of the things were relatively straightforward to solve, and it's just engaging with people and talking about them and explaining in simple terms how you can address these complex issues. So we looked, so that was at Leicester City Council. The work continued when I became Professor of Energy Management at De Montfort University in Leicester, and a lot of my research at De Montfort University was all about how you can improve energy efficiency of buildings, cities, small businesses, and also looking at non-technical barriers. So how you engage with decision makers and how you engage with, particularly with young people. So we did projects looking at how you design the new schools that were going to be built in Leicester. So there was a £200 million project to rebuild all the schools in Leicester, all the secondary schools, and we wanted to make sure that all these schools were built to be zero carbon schools. Well, it didn't happen because the government changed in 2010 and the programme stopped, but it did enable us to engage with young people about the design of their schools. Young people, pupils, were able to talk about how they wanted their new school building, and they did get better schools than they would had we not engaged with them. And the other area of working with young people is at festivals. So we did a number of projects over the years to work with woodcraft folk volunteers at music festivals to take different exciting concepts. And here you can see Sust and Able, who are from 2001, so they are nearly 21 now, and they went to Johannesburg as well as here at the Summer Sunday in Leicester, and they were at the International Camp in 2001. And we've engaged with people at music festivals, doing lots of interesting things, and we've been able to get a bit of publicity about it as well through this BBC site. And if people tell you that you can't fill in, nobody will fill in a questionnaire at a music festival, this shows you that they will. So it is relatively easy to engage with festival goers and talk about relatively complex things. And we've written up a lot of the actions that we got from these events in the form of visual minutes. So my background as an engineer is in terms of engaging with non-engineers as well as engineers, working in teams with engineers to solve problems, working with non-engineers to address political issues, and also trying to harness social media. So if anybody wants to listen to the podcast that the Resist project did, I'm sure Debs can send a link to it. The three things I wanted to talk about today were how you deal with the national aspects of the climate emergency. So the government have energy policy, climate policy. I think if anybody looks at what the government policy is, they will soon recognise that it's not going to deliver their targets. So what else should they be doing? The Committee on Climate Change is an organisation that advises government, and they provide independent advice on how to build a low carbon economy. It's chaired by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lord Debden, and it receives lots of evidence and produces lots of reports to them. I then want to talk briefly about Labour for a Green New Deal, which is from the Labour Party, and this is a campaign that was started a couple of years ago on the back of the manifesto in 2019 and 2017. And I don't know if you remember the manifesto in 2019, but it was quite a radical manifesto in terms of how you deal with the climate emergency. And I'll share some details of that later. And finally, I wanted to just briefly say something about the Royal Academy of Engineering's approach to net zero as well. All these approaches are similar in that they all say you have to take a multidisciplinary approach. You have to address the different key areas of homes, businesses, transport, food. The Labour for a Green New Deal focuses a lot more on equity and north-south issues, but they're all saying the same sort of things, that we need to address things together, and we need to deal with the demand side, the supply side, and increase awareness. So the Committee on Climate Change is saying that the government needs to do more, and it's been saying that for a number of years. But they're saying that COVID-19 gives us an opportunity to address climate change at the same time in any COVID recovery. And that's what I think our project should focus on as well. And the reason for that is that at the moment, people are saying, how do we change society after the coronavirus? Well, if you're not addressing the climate emergency at the same time, you're missing an opportunity. And if we are not talking about a climate emergency at the same time, we are missing an opportunity to engage with people about this whole complex area. So what do the Committee on Climate Change talk about? Well, they talk about infrastructure, and that's what we've been talking about in this project. And this Ingenious project isn't taking the approach we took a few years ago, which was, oh, we need to change behaviour and that will solve everything. No, we need to look at climate resilient infrastructure. We need to be dealing with training and support and reskilling people for a new net zero economy. And again, that links into post-COVID things with all the potential unemployment coming up. Then why aren't people retrained and reskilled for a net zero economy? We've been talking about building low energy homes for decades. We know exactly how to build a low energy home. It's very straightforward, but government standards don't allow us to do that yet. But the Committee on Climate Change make sure that we're upgrading our homes to ensure they are fit for the future. We've seen a lot about cycling in the last few months, and there's been examples of cities who have been making it more easy to walk, cycle and work remotely. And it's the sort of things that in the past, the sort of decision makers, people in charge would say, oh, we can't do that. Well, what the coronavirus has shown is that we can do that, and it is possible to get cars out of streets and get people cycling and walking. Then the Committee of Climate Change also talk about dealing with tree planting, reforestation, green infrastructure, etc. And again, the Committee on Climate Change is saying use the investment in green infrastructure to support the economic recovery. Deal with long-term behaviours. I mean, again, we've seen shifts in behaviours over the last few months. Behaviours that some people in the past say couldn't be changed. Well, they can. So we need to be ambitious. Not really sure what the resilience deficit means. I'm sure one of you can tell me that later. But I suppose it's, well, if you're dealing with energy and society and stuff, we need to be resilient and plan for things in the future. So we need to make sure that we are resilient against future changes in the climate and plan for it, not just defer it till later. And that's another reason for a more ambitious target, because the more ambitious target you have, the more quickly you need to do this. Committee on Climate Change also want fairness embedded as a core principle, and they want to make sure that any future post-COVID recovery doesn't lock in greenhouse gas emissions or support fossil fuels, etc. Because that is a big risk. In terms of the Labour for a Green New Deal, they take a more comprehensive approach, and they've got 9 different areas that they're looking at, and they are a bit more radical than the Committee on Climate Change. Yeah, it's probably worth saying at this point that there's some criticism of the Committee of Climate Change from some academics, because the sort of things that the Committee on Climate Change recommend have been sort of watered down by themselves, because they know if they recommend anything too radical, the current government will just not accept it. So they self-censor some of their recommendations, tone them down a bit for the current government, because they know if they're radical, they just won't accept it. So they self-censor in some respects. Whereas at Labour for a Green New Deal are saying, look, we need a bigger system change, and they're following more the Extinction Rebellion approach to it, rather than the government's more business as usual. And they're saying that changing the way we finance things for a just green transition is the way forward, and that there is funding out there, and that you can create millions of green jobs in the future as well with that finance. If you think of the infrastructure decisions at the moment, then there are plans to build a number of new nuclear power stations built by the Chinese at billions of pounds. Well, if the finance for that was spent instead on insulating every home and business in the country, then that would create more jobs, and in my opinion be far more effective use of funding, resulting in more emission reductions and better quality jobs, because you would need jobs to go around and survey every home and business. You'd need jobs to install new equipment in those homes and businesses. You would need maintenance programs to maintain and monitor this equipment, so that there is lots and lots of jobs to be had in dealing with large-scale energy efficiency improvements. However, traditionally, government have said we would rather spend all our money on one project that we can just sign one contract on, rather than thousands and thousands of smaller projects which are more and more difficult to manage. The other issues that Labour for a Green New Deal talk about are healthy neighbourhoods. So it's talking about local communities and green space and broadband and wider things. The green public transport as well, with the railways and cycleways, etc. they're talking about a global Green New Deal. So this isn't just a UK issue or an EU issue, it's a world issue. So how do you support net zero in the global south as well? They're addressing food issues and land use and food, and dealing with our agricultural systems, which many would argue are causing some of the issues. So we need to address agriculture as well. And then land use and dealing with questions of ownership of land, etc. So the more radical approach is saying a commitment for zero carbon emissions by 2030. Now that is really ambitious. Is it achievable? A lot of people say no, and as more time goes by, well, that's probably correct. However, if you have an ambitious target at a closer date, you do more now and you don't push it off to the future. So I'm all in favour of ambitious close targets because it changes the way you do things. But you've got issues. What is the definition of zero carbon? Zero carbon means different things to different people, and as engineers we need to be clear on what the definition of zero carbon is and how we are dealing with it. We need to be rapidly phasing out fossil fuels. I think that's taken as read, and we shouldn't be supporting more fossil fuel development like the government just announced a couple of weeks ago in support for new things in Africa, which is odd if you've got a policy one way and what you're doing is going in the opposite direction. I explained earlier, I spent most of my career looking at demand management. However, we do need large-scale investment in renewables, and we've had presentations on large-scale renewables here. So we do need large-scale renewables as well as improved demand-side management and demand response for electricity and for heat as well. The Green New Deal also argues for a just transition to well-paid unionised green jobs. And as I was saying earlier, it is possible to get these jobs if you have a policy of improving energy efficiency of homes and business throughout the country. And then there's a question of ownership. You know, the electricity, gas and water industry used to be owned by local authorities, and they're arguing for more democratic ownership, more municipal ownership of energy services. In terms of public transport, looking at the non-carbon aspects of public transport as well, such as public health, and questioning what sort of rail services we need in the future, and again looking at more democratic control over public transport. The north-south issues with supporting developing countries' climate transitions is also a key part of their proposals, because they recognise that UK doesn't operate in isolation and deals with other countries throughout the world and needs to support particularly south countries. Then there's the issue of universal services. So it's a Green New Deal isn't just looking at decarbonising the economy, it's trying to build a new socialist economy run by and for the many, and issues such as universal services are part of that discussion. And then the final point is dealing with climate refugees. There's a lot of potential problems over the future with climate refugees. So how do we deal with that now, and how do we prevent displacement in the future? So that's given two different aspects of decarbonising the city, one from the Committee on Climate Change and one from Labour for a Green New Deal. And what we need to be dealing with is how we then discuss some of these issues with our project in the future. Before I go on to that, I just wanted to say a little bit about the Royal Academy of Engineering. They fund a lot of projects, not just the public engagement projects that we're involved with here with Ingenious, but that they fund professors at universities, they fund joint industry, university work, and they have this National Energy Engineering Policy Centre that is trying to put together a vision for a low carbon economy by 2050. The reason they take in 2050 is that that's current government policy, and they're trying to bring together key people, key engineers and non-engineers, I suppose, to come up with a series of recommendations of what a net zero economy might look like. And there are lots of examples of organizations that have produced reports on what a net zero or a low carbon economy might be. The UK Energy Research Centre have produced lots of reports going back over the years. So there is no shortage of information about different scenarios. The challenge for us in this project is to identify the sort of scenarios that we think can address the climate emergency, and then to be able to describe these scenarios to people as part of our project. So what do we want to be developing over the next few months? What resources and materials do we have for our young engineers when they're attending festivals and talking to young people in kids' fields? What resources and materials do we have when you are out talking to a local group? What case studies do we want to do? We've mentioned a case study on biblings. Are there other case studies we want to do? The original proposal talks about a big social media action. So what do we want to do in social media? And then what other things do we want to focus on next? So there are lots of opportunities out there, and for our project now we need to be deciding which are the ones that you as young engineers want to focus on. What are the things you want to try and get across to the different audiences, and how you want to get it across in a informative and fun way. And our approach in the past has always been through peer education, so young people talking to other young people, and we know that that is effective, but we also know that over time people's priorities change, and you have to harness whatever priorities there are at the current time. So from my point of view, the current challenge is post-COVID, and there is therefore an opportunity to discuss with people an alternative vision to the current business as usual approach to deal with future jobs and future energy services and environmental services, and that taking an approach that was described in the Labour for a Green New Deal sounds to me like a very sensible thing to be doing in the future. So that is all I wanted to say in terms of an overview of sort of policy issues. and I really wanted to get some feedback from people for where we should be going next, what we should be focusing on, and what support young engineers will need from us and devs, etc., to make sure that the project works and is successful. Is anybody there?
Yes, thank you very much. This is Colin.
Is Deb still with us? Really, I'm after the younger people to give us some feedback on what they're wanting to get out of it, and then us older ones can support them in what they're trying to do. I don't know, Josh Hope Collins, you were involved in Face Your Elephant in the past. Do you have any comments to make on what we've been talking about today and in previous weeks? Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's all right, Paul. Yeah, I was just about to ask. I remember a lot of the Face Your Elephant stuff was based around a project from CAT on Zero Carbon Britain. It might have been called Zero Carbon Britain. And there was a whole load of publicity material from that project around, and I remember a lot of it was behavioural, and a lot of the stuff that Face Your Elephant was talking to people about was more behavioural. But a lot of the stuff from the Zero Carbon Britain was this more structural stuff. Does that material exist somewhere? Is it digital, so you could kind of send it around? It might be a good starting point for people to look at and kind of see how previous reports have tried to publicise it.
Yeah, they updated it last year. So sorry jumping in, Paul, but I actually went on a Zero Carbon Britain course online run by CAT for 2 days last week. I was going to go and do it at their site at Machynlleth, but then of course everything got locked down. So they switched to an online format. And it's their lead guy is called Paul Allen, and he did some of the presentation, and others were bits and pieces from other people who are practitioners of various sorts. There was a Somerset councillor who talked about decarbonising their village and this kind of thing. That report, the 2019 version, is downloadable, and other material to back that up. I was actually contemplating doing a little bit of a similar sort of review like Paul's just done on that particular course, although we have Anne McGarry on our team. I don't think she's with us this evening, but
yeah, I am.
Oh, you are. Hello, Anne. I didn't see you. Oh, you are Anne. Yeah, right, without your surname. Yeah, but you worked for CAT as education officer, didn't you? So you know more than I do.
Well, Deborah's asked me to do a session on ZCB next week.
Oh, right. Great. Next week.
Yeah. We probably haven't had the notification for it yet, I don't think.
Okay, so we're going to have 2 sessions next week.
Have I got the wrong date? What do you think's happening next week?
And on the 6th, which is Wednesday, is that right? No, sorry. Let me get to my diary. Oh, I've got too many screens.
Anne will be talking about Zero Carbon Britain at a future meeting, and it's worth saying that the
oh, sorry, that's sorry, Thursday next week. My apologies.
No, it's Wednesday. I've got it down for. I better double check. That's what Daniela said to me. But anyway, 7 o'clock.
Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Sorry,
well,
I was just
we
asking.
need to sort the date out. Maybe that's my mistake. I just put it in my diary incorrectly, but I'm looking forward to that. I think we'll learn a lot from that.
Yeah, yeah. Josh is quite right, and Colin's quite right that we've used zero carbon Britain in the past, and it is very